about the most lopsided underdog stories in history.
Right, the ones where people always look back and try to find that hidden tactical advantage.
Exactly. We want a logical, mathematical explanation for the impossible, like a secret weapon or a critical terrain error.
Something that allowed a tiny force to overcome a massive empire.
Yeah, but today we're looking at an event that completely shatters that mathematical approach to history. Our mission on this deep dive is to explore the life of Prophet Muhammad, the legacy of the greatest man who ever lived.
It's an incredible subject.
It really is. And the focal point of the sources we are exploring today is the legendary Battle of Badr.
Because we were looking at a scenario that just defies every conventional military metric.
Right, completely. I mean, the Muslim force consisted of just over 300 individuals.
Barely equipped, too. They largely lacked armor, and they had very, very few horses.
A truly fragile force. And they were standing against the Meccan army, which was, a heavily armed force of 1,000 men.
1,000 elite soldiers, outfitted with the absolute best weaponry and cavalry of the time.
It's the absolute definition of impossible odds. But our deep dive today isn't primarily about troop formations or supply lines.
No, not at all.
The source material paints a picture of profound emotional stakes, unwavering faith, and these legendary events where the spiritual and physical realms just collided. It literally shifted the course of human history forever.
And we're going to see some mind-blowing details today. Angelic interventions, fierce acts of devotion, and a shocking aftermath that left an entire region in disbelief.
I mean, I just want to understand how a force that small even stands its ground without immediately breaking rank and fleeing.
Right, it doesn't make sense on paper.
There has to be an underlying emotional core holding them together.
Well, that emotional core is actually illustrated by a stunningly intimate moment in the historical accounts. It takes place just moments before the battle begins.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So the prophet is walking down the military lines, getting his men into formation. He's using an arrow in his hand to gently nudge people so the ranks are perfectly straight.
Almost like the lines formed for communal prayer.
Exactly like that. But as he does this, he accidentally pokes a soldier named Sawad in the stomach, just because Sawad was standing a bit too far forward.
Which is a completely normal accident in the chaos of preparing for war.
Totally normal. But Sawad speaks up. He looks at his commander and says, "You hurt me. I demand retaliation."
Wait, really? A soldier is demanding to strike his commander.
Right there in front of the entire army, minutes before facing a massively superior enemy force.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is wild. Imagine a modern four-star general walking the front lines, getting the troops ready for a desperate defense.
It's a tense situation.
Right. He accidentally bumps a private, and the private demands to hit him back to settle the score. In any conventional military structure, that private is court-martialed instantly.
Oh, absolutely. Or at the very least, physically removed for insubordination.
So how does the prophet react?
What's fascinating here is that the prophet doesn't react with anger. He doesn't assert his authority or punish the man at all.
What does he do?
He literally lifts his shirt, exposes his own stomach, and tells Sawad to go ahead and retaliate.
Wow. That level of humility from a leader is just staggering. So what does the soldier do?
Well, Sawad drops his weapon. He lunges forward, wraps his arms around the prophet, and kisses his stomach.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the prophet asks him, what drove him to do this? Sawad explains that he can see the reality of the enemy force. He knows he is likely going to die in a few hours.
So he just wanted that connection.
Exactly. He wanted his very last physical contact on this earth to be his skin touching the skin of the prophet.
Man, that changes the entire complexion of this army. I mean, they aren't conscripts forced to fight. They are operating on an unfathomable level of love and devotion.
These men were willingly laying down their wealth, their families, and their lives out of pure devotion. They were essentially acting as human shields out of love.
That is incredibly powerful.
It is. But that devotion is met with an equally profound weight of leadership. After the prophet finishes arranging the army, choosing the terrain, and exhausting absolutely all his worldly preparations, he retreats to his tent.
Because he's done everything humanly possible at that point.
Right, and he turns to supplication. He makes a prayer, a dua, with such desperate intensity that it actually terrifies his companions.
Terrifies them? How so?
He pleads with the divine, stating that if this small group perishes today, God will never be worshipped on earth again. He is so consumed by this that his closest companion, Abu Bakr, has to step in.
Because of the physical toll it's taking.
Yes. Abu Bakr gently holds him and consoles him, assuring him that his plea has been heard by the heavens.
It really sounds like the absolute limits of human effort meeting the need for divine intervention,
That intersection is the essence of a foundational concept called tawakkul.
which means ultimate trust, right?
Ultimate trust or reliance on the divine, yes. But the key mechanism of tawakkul is that it does not mean sitting back passively and waiting for a miracle.
So you have to put in the work first.
Exactly. It demands that a person exhaust every single physical, strategic, and intellectual means available to them first. Only after the human capacity is entirely spent do they throw the matter entirely into the hands of the divine.
And according to the biographical texts, that ultimate reliance triggers a legendary response on the battlefield.
The awe-inspiring descent of angels.
Right. The sources describe the arrival of an unseen army. First, the promise of 1,000 angels, which the accounts say eventually scaled up to 3,000 and then 5,000.
With incredibly vivid imagery, too, like the Archangel Gabriel wearing a yellow turban, leading the charge on his horse, Haizum.
The imagery is amazing. But looking at those numbers, a question comes to mind.
Sure, what is it?
Well, if classical texts describe entities like Gabriel possessing the power to flatten entire cities with just a fraction of their strength, why send 5,000? Isn't an army of angels mathematically overkill when just one would theoretically be more than enough?
That's a great observation. The sheer volume of the angelic force was not about military necessity at all.
No.
No, the divine could have neutralized the enemy army instantly without a single sword being swung. The deployment of thousands of angels was entirely about human psychology.
To boost morale.
Exactly. It was designed to comfort the hearts of the believers on the ground. Seeing or feeling that overwhelming presence gave them steadfastness, It reassured a heavily outnumbered group of men that they were supported by the heavens.
That makes perfect sense. And the psychological impact must have been absolutely terrifying for the opposing side.
Oh, it completely shattered them.
The sources mention these eerie, unexplainable casualties on the battlefield. Like there are accounts of a Muslim warrior pursuing a Meccan fighter and suddenly hearing the crack of a whip in the air above him.
Followed by a voice shouting, "Diddy up, Haizum!"
Right. And before the Muslim warrior's sword even reaches his target, the Meccan fighter falls dead to the ground.
And the physical evidence left behind was unmistakable. The casualties caused by these unseen forces were entirely different from standard sword wounds.
Oh, so? Like, what did they look like?
The strikes were incredibly clean, often snapping the neck, and they left a blackened, burned mark across the face.
Almost like a brand.
Yeah, resembling the strike of a whip made of fire.
That is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
There's also this incredibly surreal account of two neutral spectators. They were just sitting on a nearby mountain watching the battle unfold.
Oh, the cloud account.
Yeah. They see a cloud approach their position, and they hear the sound of galloping horses and that same voice shouting from the sky.
The sheer shock of witnessing the supernatural bleed into reality is so intense that one of those spectators drops dead of a heart attack on the spot.
It was the ultimate form of psychological warfare. I mean, the supernatural element fundamentally distorted the reality of the battlefield.
It really did. The sources note that once the fighting actually commenced, the Meccan army suddenly perceived the Muslims as being double their actual number.
Wait, double? Even though they were outnumbered 3-1?
Yes. Before the battle, the Meccans viewed them as this insignificant, easily crushable group. But once the swords clashed, that perception violently shifted. It utterly shattered the morale of the heavily armed elite.
So let's look at how that physical combat actually started. The accounts describe the battle kicking off with single combat duels.
Right, the ancient Arabian tradition of Mubaraza.
Where champions step forward to fight one-on-one before the main armies collide. But why risk your best fighters before the main battle even starts? It seems like a huge gamble.
It was entirely about psychological dominance. If your champion effortlessly dispatches the enemy's champion, your entire army surges with adrenaline.
While the enemy's morale plummets before the general charge even begins.
Precisely. So 3 champions from the Meccan side step forward to initiate this. Utbah, his brother Shaba, and his son Al-Walid.
And in response, 3 young men from the Ansar step out from the Muslim ranks. Now, who are the Ansar in this context, for those who might not know?
The Ansar were the local inhabitants of Medina. They were the ones who had taken the Muslims in and given them sanctuary after they were exiled from Mecca.
Okay, so they step forward to fight.
But the Meccan champions actually refused to fight them. They declare that they have no blood feud with the people of Medina.
They wanted to fight their own.
Right. They demanded to fight their own peers, their own blood relatives who had defected from Mecca.
So the Prophet pulls the Ansar back and sends out his own family. He calls up Hamza, Ali, and Ubaidah.
The historical and spiritual weight of this specific duel is immense. These men were stepping out to fight their own relatives.
Not over territory or resources or gold.
No, they were fighting over the fundamental truth of their existence. It was a clash of ultimate worldviews.
It's so intense.
Ali later reflected that he would be the first person to kneel before the divine on Judgment Day to litigate this specific dispute, because it represented the ultimate severing of the old tribal order in favor of faith.
The combat itself is described as incredibly brutal, dust erupting everywhere as the champions clash. Hamza and Ali dispatch their Meccan opponents almost immediately.
But Ubaidah and Utbah strike each other simultaneously, delivering devastating blows.
Yeah, Ali and Hamza have to rush over, finish Utbah off, and carry Ubaidah back to the Prophet's camp. And Ubaidah loses his leg and tragically passes away a few days later, being honored as a martyr.
That fierce, close-quarters combat really sets the tone for the entire battle. It highlights the catastrophic fall of the arrogant Meccan leadership.
And no individual embodied that arrogance more deeply than the commander of the enemy army, Abu Jahl.
Absolutely not. The Prophet actually referred to Abu Jahl as the pharaoh of his people.
Well, the accounts of Abu Jahl's downfall are practically cinematic. There's a Muslim fighter named Abd al-Rahman standing in the battle line.
Looking to his left and right.
Right. And he realizes he is flanked by two very young boys from the Ansar. He initially feels a sense of dread, wishing he had seasoned veterans covering his blind spots instead of youths.
You have a very natural reaction in a war zone.
But then, the boy on his right whispers to him, asking him to point out Abu Jahl. And he swears an oath that he will kill the commander or die trying.
And a moment later, the boy on his left whispers the exact same request.
It's incredible. Why were they so focused on him?
Because these two young boys had heard of the immense torture Abu Jahl had inflicted on the Prophet and the early believers in Mecca. They were internally competing with each other for the honor of dismantling the head of that oppression.
So, Abd al-Rahman spots Abu Jahl heavily guarded in the distance. He points him out to the boys, and the sources describe them flying through the chaotic battlefield like falcons.
They managed to bypass the elite guards and strike Abu Jahl down, severely crippling the commander.
Which brings us to the conclusion of Abu Jahl's life, which serves as a profoundly poetic closing chapter to his tyranny.
It really is poetic justice. As he is bleeding out in the dirt, a Muslim man named Abdullah ibn Mas'ud finds him.
And we have to understand the dynamic here, right? Ibn Mas'ud was historically a very marginalized figure.
Yes, he was a shepherd, physically frail, and he was notoriously mocked by the Meccan elite.
Especially Abu Jahl.
Right. They mocked him for having incredibly thin legs. Yet, the Prophet had previously elevated Ibn Mas'ud's status, stating that his thin legs were heavier on the divine scales than a mountain because of his profound faith.
It's an incredible reversal of fortune. The marginalized shepherd is now stepping onto the chest of the bleeding, defeated commander of the elite army.
But even with a sword to his neck, Abu Jahl's arrogance remains intact.
It's crazy. He looks up at Ibn Mas'ud and sneers, telling him that he has climbed very high for someone who used to just herd sheep.
He is incapable of letting go of his artificial worldly status, even as his reality is violently collapsing around him.
And going back to that pharaoh comparison.
Yes, the comparison is deeply deliberate. Just as the biblical pharaoh was drowned and humbled, Abu Jahl wasn't struck down by a legendary warrior or a bolt of lightning.
He was dismantled by two youths and finished by a man he deemed entirely beneath him. It was the ultimate humiliating destruction of arrogance.
So the physical battle concludes with a decisive victory for the Muslims.
But the historical accounts show that the aftermath created a psychological earthquake across the entire Arabian Peninsula. The way the news is received in the surrounding cities is completely polarizing.
Let's examine the reaction in Medina first. The messengers arrive at high speed, riding the Prophet's own camel.
They just start shouting out the names of the Meccan nobility who've been killed. Abu Jahl, Umayyah, and an entire roster of untouchable elites.
And the citizens of Medina literally reject the news. They think the messengers are hallucinating.
Or worse, that the Muslim army was annihilated, the Prophet was killed, and these men stole his camel to flee back home.
Right. It's akin to hearing that a local high school football team just completely obliterated the reigning Super Bowl champions.
The brain simply refuses to compute the information because it defies all known logic.
Now, contrast that stunned disbelief with the atmosphere in Mecca. It is pure devastation compounded by profound humiliation.
Just look at the fate of Abu Lahab. another fiercely oppressive Meccan leader.
He was incredibly hostile to the Muslims, but he possessed a deep cowardice. He refused to march out to Badr himself, hiring someone else to take his place in the army.
So he's sitting in a pavilion back in Mecca, his back turned, while a servant is sharpening arrows nearby. A returning, defeated fighter rides into the city and delivers the news.
And the fighter explains that it wasn't just the Muslims who broke them.
He describes facing men in white on horses, suspended between the heavens and the earth, cutting through their ranks with unstoppable force.
Now, the servant sharpening the arrows, who was secretly a practicing Muslim, overhears this. Overcome with joy, he involuntarily shouts out that those must be the angels.
Well, you can imagine how that went over.
Abu Lahab, already humiliated by the defeat, flies into a violent rage. He tackles the servant and begins brutally beating him.
But then the servant's mistress, a woman named al-Fadl, witnesses this. She grabs a heavy tent pole and smashes it over Abu Lahab's head, severely injuring him.
She screams at him for attacking a weak servant just because his master wasn't present to protect him.
In that heavily patriarchal, honor-obsessed society, for a prominent leader to be physically struck down by a woman in public.
It was an irrecoverable loss of dignity, and his demise rapidly accelerates from there. Within a week, Abu Lahab contracts a terrifying, highly contagious skin disease.
He dies, and the fear of his illness is so overwhelming that no one, not even his family, will go near his body.
He is left to decompose in his home for 3 days. The Meccan citizens finally have to shame his 2 sons into disposing of the remains.
Even then, they refuse to touch him. They drag his body out, push it against a wall, and bury him by hurling stones at him from a safe distance.
It is the absolute pinnacle of degradation. But, the torment for the city of Mecca wasn't solely in the staggering loss of life.
No, it was heavily amplified by a brutal policy instituted by the surviving leadership, a strict ban on public mourning.
No weeping, no wailing, no elegies could be recited.
Well, why enforce a ban on mourning when almost every family in the city just lost a father, a husband, or a son?
It was a desperate attempt to maintain a facade of strength. If the citizens wailed and cried, it would signal to the surrounding tribes and to the Muslims in Medina how deeply the defeat had crippled them.
They wanted to deny their enemies the satisfaction of hearing their pain.
Exactly.
It's like a collapsing regime projecting grand military parades on state television while the capital city is actively burning to the ground.
That's a perfect analogy.
The grief of the citizens is entirely trapped. You have an entire society forced to swallow an unimaginable trauma just to save face. Here's where it gets really interesting, like a pressure cooker.
There is a deeply moving anecdote about an elderly, blind Meccan man named Al-Muttalib. He had lost 3 of his sons at Badr.
3 sons, that's heartbreaking.
And he is suffocating in this silent, unexpressed agony. One night, he hears the distant sound of a woman weeping.
Hoping that the leadership has finally lifted the ban.
Right, he asks someone to investigate, desperate for permission to finally cry for his boys out loud.
But the messenger returns with devastating news. He tells the blind man that the woman isn't mourning a fallen soldier. She is just a Bedouin woman crying because she lost her camel.
The blind man is so overcome by the absurdity of the situation that he releases his suppressed grief through tragic poetry.
Questioning how someone could weep over a lost animal while the elites of Mecca lay slaughtered in the desert, unmourned.
It perfectly encapsulates the internal psychological collapse of the Meccan society. They were completely hollowed out.
The external threat was neutralized, and the arrogants were humbled. But looking at the sources, the adrenaline of this miraculous victory almost instantly gives way to an entirely new, incredibly heavy set of challenges for the Muslims.
Because managing survival is one thing, but managing sudden power is infinitely more complex.
The transition from severe persecution to sudden military and economic triumph is historically where most ideological movements fracture.
And we see this tension manifest immediately on the battlefield through a very human dispute over the spoils of war.
The Muslim army naturally fractured into 3 distinct groups after the fighting stopped. You had the frontline fighters who pursued the fleeing enemy.
You had the guards who stayed behind to shield the prophet.
And the scavengers who ran across the battlefield collecting the discarded Meccan armor, weapons, and wealth.
And almost immediately, a massive argument breaks out.
The fighters claim the spoils belong to them for doing the heavy lifting. The guards argue they performed the most critical task of protecting the leadership.
And the collectors argue possession is 9/10 of the law. It is an entirely natural human reaction to newfound wealth.
but it threatened to unravel the intense spiritual unity they had just demonstrated hours prior.
To resolve this, a divine revelation descends, entirely stripping the spoils away from all of them. It declares that the wealth belongs fundamentally to God and his messenger.
And once personal entitlement is removed, a new system is introduced. How was it ultimately divided?
It established a strict 80-20 split. 80% of the spoils were distributed equally among all the men who participated in the campaign, regardless of their specific role.
Though cavalry received a larger share to account for the expensive upkeep of horses, right?
Yes, but the genius is in the remaining 20%. That portion was taken off the top and divided into fifths.
Allocated for the state treasury, the prophet's household, relatives, orphans, the impoverished, and stranded travelers.
That immediately transforms the wealth from a source of personal greed into an instrument of social welfare. It was a profound lesson in taqwa, or God consciousness.
It reinforced strict military discipline by showing them that victory was a divine trust, not a reward for their personal prowess.
And it ensured the vulnerable members of society were cared for alongside the warriors.
Now, if managing the wealth was difficult, deciding the fate of the 70 elite Meccan prisoners of war seems agonizing.
These are the very men who had tortured the Muslims for over a decade.
The inner circle of leadership is completely torn on how to proceed. Two starkly contrasting viewpoints emerge.
Abu Bakr advocates for profound leniency. He argues that these prisoners, despite their hostility, are still blood relatives.
He proposes taking a financial ransom, which would inject much-needed capital into their fragile new state.
And he expresses hope that witnessing such mercy might eventually soften their hearts toward faith.
Then you have Umar, who takes an incredibly hardline stance. He points to the extensive history of oppression, exile, and murder at the hands of these men.
He advocates for execution, arguing that a nascent state must establish absolute deterrence and show zero tolerance for tyranny.
The prophet is visibly burdened by the immense emotional weight of the decision. He analyzes the perspectives of both men through a historical lens.
He tells Abu Bakr that his merciful nature resembles Abraham and Jesus, prophets who continuously ask for forgiveness for their transgressing nations.
And he tells Umar that his uncompromising stance resembles Noah and Moses, prophets who eventually prayed for the total removal of their oppressors when the tyranny became irredeemable.
The prophet ultimately aligns with Abu Bakr's perspective and decides to accept the ransom, showing mercy. However, the historical texts note that a divine revelation subsequently descends, gently but firmly reprimanding this decision.
The revelation clarifies that for a brand new, highly vulnerable state surrounded by hostile empires, showing absolute strength by eliminating the core leadership of the oppressors would have been the strategically purer course of action to establish security.
However, it explicitly permits the ransom they collected, confirming they committed no sin.
The emotional toll of receiving that divine correction is staggering. The sources describe Umar returning the next day to find the Prophet and Abu Bakr sitting together, weeping intensely.
When Umar asks why they are crying, they explain the gravity of the divine feedback. They realize how dangerously close they came to misjudging the delicate balance between mercy and justice.
It is a vital historical image to analyze. It proves they were not bloodthirsty conquerors reveling in their newfound dominance.
No, they were deeply conscientious leaders, carrying an agonizingly heavy moral burden, understanding that every decision they made was weighed on a cosmic scale.
It perfectly synthesizes the incredible journey mapped out in these sources. We witness the unfathomable devotion of a soldier wanting nothing more than to embrace his leader before dying.
We explored the terrifying psychological reality of angelic interventions.
We saw the ultimate dismantling of arrogant tyrants by the very people they marginalized.
The true legacy of this legendary event is far greater than a tactical victory against impossible odds. It serves as a profound testament to exhausting human effort before relying on the divine.
And it marks the establishment of a community anchored in devotion, rigorous discipline, and intense moral accountability, rather than the sheer pursuit of power.
That's beautifully said.
We've explored how absolute faith can seemingly summon the heavens and rewrite the trajectory of human history. But I want to leave you with a different angle to mull over.
Okay, what is it?
The physical battle against 1,000 armored men is terrifying, but think about the internal battle that follows. When the dust settles, the swords are sheathed, and you suddenly inherit massive wealth, absolute power, and the ability to enact revenge on your oppressors.
Wow, yeah.
How do you navigate that sudden arrival of influence without losing your soul in the process? Managing victory is often much harder than surviving defeat. That is the quiet, enduring legacy of the greatest man who ever lived. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.